Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
Foundations.
They were the party that had primarily filled all the priestly roles. I mean, these were the guys who virtually spoke for God in the temple. The name Sadducees means the righteous, which is kind of a little bit haughtier.
Foundations. Understanding the Jewish foundations of our Christian faith. With Robbo Robinson and Mandy Warby.
Judaism, just like all other religions, has different groups and factions within it. In Christendom, we call them denominations. Last time we learned about the Pharisees, this time we're going to learn about the Sadducees.
And I think sometimes, I know I'm guilty of this, when I used to read the Bible and I would read about these different factions within Judaism, you know, when I'd read the Gospels, and I used to think, oh, how ridiculous. And yet at the same time, now that I know more about Christian history and Jewish history, you know, the Christian church is absolutely overwhelmed by different denominations. Even within the Catholic Church, you've got so many different branches. You've got Franciscans and the Dominicans, you've got the Benedictines, you've got the Jesuits and the just normal churches. There's everything from the most rigidly traditional to the more liberal, casual. Yeah. Then you've got all your Protestant denominations. You've got your Baptists and your Methodists and your Pentecostals and your Anglicans and every, you know, dog and cat fight that's going in there as well. Right. You've got your Coptic churches, your Ethiopian Coptics, and you've got your Egyptian Coptics. You've got the Syriac church. You've got all the different...
Well, the Greek Orthodox is in there.
There's so many.
I guess it really doesn't allow Christians to point the finger at the Judaic people, but obviously vice versa, like everyone's as differentiated as each other.
We're peculiar creatures, aren't we, in that we kind of pat our own backs and just sweep under the rug.
Ignore the fact that we've got thousands of
denominations. We ignore our own weaknesses, but we're very quick to point out the weaknesses in others.
So true. Well, we don't have a right to criticise the Jews. And I guess looking at the Sadducees as we are today, they were both religious and political. Mostly political, though, and they held a great deal of power among the Jews in Israel. So we learnt last program about the Pharisees and how they were primarily spread throughout the land, leading congregations, teaching in synagogues, dealing with matters of Jewish law and jurisprudence. The Sadducees were the ones really that held the priestly positions amongst Jews. Yeah,
it's actually really curious that they ended up having all of this political power, and yet they were the party that had primarily filled all the priestly roles. I mean, these were the guys who virtually spoke for God in the temple. The name Sadducees means the righteous, which is kind of a little bit haughty, I think. Yeah. You know, what do we want to call ourselves? Let's call ourselves the righteous. It's a little bit uppity, really, isn't it? They did have a lot of power. So here's the thing. The Pharisees were basically like the conservatives of the day in ancient Israel, where the Sadducees were probably more liberal. They were the progressives of the day. And again, that's kind of baffling to me, considering that they were the priests.
Yeah, that's right.
And they were also known as the Zadokites, and that's because it's believed that they were established by a man by the name of Zadok during the days of King David. They were like the aristocrats of Israel. They tended to be quite wealthy. They had a lot of powerful positions socially as well, mostly as priests, and they held these really high positions of also a chief priest and high priest. And they also held the majority of the 70 seats in the ruling council known as the Sanhedrin. Okay.
Now, if you read through Exodus, you note, of course, that Aaron was the original priest, and then he was of the tribe of Levi. Yep. And so they had to be of the bloodline of Aaron to be a priest, to sort of follow that family line. Yep. So were the Zadokites from that line, or were they a different line again?
No, they weren't. Remember Eli the priest, or Eli the priest? He was the high priest. He didn't rein in his very wicked sons, and as a result, God cursed that family line and said that they would all die young. That was problematic, that they weren't going to last all that long. So another family line, a blood family line, that came from Aaron's descendants was Zadok. Right. So the Zadokites come out. Now, were all of the Sadducees from the family line of Zadok? No. That's just how they got their name. By the time the Sadducees, and of course remember we had these divisions, Sadducees, Pharisees, sort of came about from the time of the exiles coming back from Babylon, Persia. And it was basically, over a period of time, you've got all of these, well, you've got an occupying force, for example, which is the Romans, and they were just appointing people.
Right,
and because the Sadducees were more politically savvy, the Romans were picking these guys to be the priests. They were appointed by Rome to do Rome's bidding.
So it's political expediency.
Absolutely. Yeah. Rome wanted the people to behave themselves, and the Jews were a rebellious people. They rebelled against God, but when Rome came, they rebelled against Rome. They wanted the people to be calm and quiet. So they were speaking for God, so it was behave yourselves and everybody's happy, and they got rich in the process.
Right.
Okay, so it was Josephus, the Jewish historian, he recorded that Caiaphas, the high priest who plotted Jesus' execution, that he was in fact also appointed to the position of high priest by the Roman prefect Valerius Gratus in 18 AD. He was Pontius Pilate's predecessor. Caiaphas was later deposed by the Roman proconsul Lucius Vitellius the Elder. So when it came to these really important Jewish priesthood roles in the Sanhedrin, as I said, Rome was the orchestrator behind all of that. I want to stress again, though, that not all priests were Sadducees, but the majority were. And not all of the Sanhedrin were Sadducees. Again, the majority were. And it was all about political power and expediency. And like the Pharisees, the Sadducees had their own particular brand of theology, beliefs and traditions. We mentioned last time that the Pharisees loved building fences around God's word to make sure you never broke anything. Yeah. So you basically lived in a straitjacket and adding layer upon layer and traditions and all the rest of it to the law. The Sadducees would mock the Pharisees, laughing at them because they would argue and debate over the most inane things. And, of course, this was a big joke to the Sadducees, who could keep the Pharisees knotted up while they just got on with making money and, schmoozing the Romans.
The wonderful thing about that, of course, is that it kept everyone in this state of failure, which meant that they could continue to make money at the temple, because it then meant more sacrifices and more offerings and whatever. So it sort of actually worked to their favour, didn't it?
Oh, for the Sadducees, yes, because the temple was just a money-making scheme for them. They got filthy rich over it. So, if the people were constantly needing sacrifices to make atonement for whatever regulation they had just infringed upon, the priests got rich from that.
I guess the one thing that brought these two groups together, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, was their hatred of Jesus. And we sort of see them, at different points through the gospel actually working together and trying to trick Jesus or outsmart him in different ways.
Absolutely.
So that was quite a unique thing, that they were so divided, and yet for this common cause they did come together against Christ. But he spoke very harshly against them.
Yes, he did.
Matthew 16 verse 4, the Pharisees and Sadducees had come. They tried to test him, asking for a sign.
Yeah.
But his response was fairly brutal. He said, "An evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, and a sign won't be given, except the sign of Jonah."
Considering they called themselves the righteous.
Yeah, that's right.
And here he is branding them an evil and adulterous generation. Oh, it's just breathtaking. That's so fun.
Yeah. And of course, later on in the same chapter, he goes on with a warning. This is in verse 6. He said, "Watch out and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and Sadducees." So he's being pretty direct.
Yeah, because of their teachings. Their doctrine was appalling. It was absolutely shoddy. And remember he said to the people, he said, your righteousness has to exceed that of the Pharisees. So they kept all the rules and regulations. Sadducees, not so much. But here he is warning their teachings, their particular brands of theology have nothing to do with it. So, he was brutal with them.
Yeah. We're going to continue looking at the beliefs of the Sadducees in the next program, as well as their social and political responsibilities. That's next time on Foundations.
This has been Foundations, a look at the Jewish foundations of our Christian faith. For study notes, resources and more, see vision.org.au/foundations.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.